Welcome to Powered by People, the business podcast from Three Hills that explores how people strategies transform organizations. In each episode, we meet an inspirational business leader, accountable for their business's readiness to win in tomorrow's world. I'm your host, Tim Pointer, a Chief People Officer and an operating partner at Three Hills, where we work to advance organizational performance across our portfolio of outstanding businesses. Joining me today is Nadine Bainbridge, a Chief People Officer with an international background in people strategy and business transformation. She has led HR in some of our best-known brands, from Durex and Scholl at Reckitt, The Times and The Sun at News UK, Amplifon on UK high streets, and for the last 8 years, PlayStation. As Regional HR Director, Nadine led PlayStation's European operations while also leading talent and learning globally. A chartered member of the CIPD, she builds cultures that deliver on a brand's promise to colleagues and consumers alike. Let's go hear from Nadine. Welcome to the Powered by People podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Very good to see you.
You too. You too.
So, your career journey, you have worked with some fantastic consumer-centric brands.
Yep.
Products that people rely upon, trust upon. You're so passionate about creating a culture that aligns to the product, services and experiences that those businesses provide.
Yeah.
Where do you start? What's your touchstone when you go into a new business and start those conversations?
I always enjoy being really new because it gives you an opportunity to ask all the silly questions and really get to understand the organisation from all aspects. So I try and make sure I meet everyone, all different kind of levels and locations in the organisation. And I think really try to get under the skin of the kind of culture. The culture as is, and in some of the organisations I've joined, there's been a desire to change that culture or evolve that culture, but really trying to get a good understanding of, we might say one thing actually at the top, or we might brand culture in a particular way in that organisation, but when you talk to an employee in a factory in India or an employee in an office in the Netherlands, or you get a really different feel for what that company culture is. And I've been fortunate, certainly across News and PlayStation, to work in environments that have loads of subcultures.
Yeah.
So particularly PlayStation gaming studios all have their own independent studio cultures. In News, the titles had different, certainly The Sun and The Times, very different cultures in those environments. And so really getting a good handle on what that is. A big piece for me, I've worked for across organisations that are headquartered in different places. So PlayStation, formerly when I joined, was in Japan and then moved to West Coast US. Amplifon was headquartered out of Italy. And I worked for SSL, which was then bought by Reckitt, but they were headquartered in the UK. That geographical culture, that kind of where you have a big mass of people, can really sway the way business is done.
How do you think about tomorrow's world, that readying an organisation? Because the different businesses you've joined, there's a lot of history.
Yes.
And you're working with the rest of the executive team to ready those businesses for tomorrow's consumers, for tomorrow's markets, for tomorrow's experiences.
Yeah.
So you've got to really get into the conversations and sometimes saying, that way that you've always worked, I'm not sure that's working anymore.
Yeah, and it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think you have to change people sometimes quite critically. Like ultimately, I think it's about being really clear or trying to have real clarity around where you are going. And I'm sure we've all been in conversations, I know you definitely have, and I have, where you kind of sat around that board table and I don't know if there is real clarity on where you're going. You kind of think there is. I used to laugh a lot, good 10 years ago, about kind of digital. We just need to digitalise. And you're like, but no one actually really knows what that means, or do we really know what that means? And does it mean different things to different people? And really helping to get some granularity on what that actually looks like and means in the future, I think, is the critical part, actually. And then I think from there, it's around kind of matching your people ultimately to that. Are they there? Can they get there? Are they definitely not there? And in which case, sometimes, and we've seen a bit of that definitely as we've evolved in PlayStation. When I joined PlayStation, it was a regional organisation and it's now a global org. I think most people looking at the brand would think, goodness, surely it's always been global, but it was very much a regional business. It takes time, it takes a lot to change people's mindsets, and being really transparent with that and clear about kind of end state and where you're going and what that will actually look like to people on the ground is something that we can overlook so often. And I think it's that really makes the difference of helping take people on the journey ultimately, really helping them understand what the world will look like and feel like in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time.
Can I just take a couple of your businesses and just understand the products behind them? So Reckitt, for example.
Yes.
I know that went through an ownership change, but what consumer brands are you talking about?
So the two largest consumer brands at what was SSL were Durex and Scholl, Dr. Scholl, so foot care and footwear. And then they had quite a few locally owned brands. News UK is obviously the two newspaper title. The Times and the Sunday Times. And then obviously from a PlayStation perspective, it speaks for itself.
Absolutely. And you came to PlayStation, eight and a half years ago?
Yes.
What did you find when you came into the organisation, and how did that, because from the outside, it's PlayStation, a tech giant. It is at the cutting edge of that whole gaming experience. It's the kind of brand that, my son will very proudly wear on a T-shirt. Sometimes that matches on the inside, as well as it's very different on the inside.
But it was for sure different. I think it was interesting because I left from very slick on the inside, very slick, well organised, and just super slick from the inside. And then I joined PlayStation and had all those assumptions that it would be. I used to always describe it to people in an interview as a bit of an adolescent. It looks like an adult, but it kind of wasn't quite an adult yet. So it definitely still had some kind of startup mentality a little bit, I think, and hadn't quite evolved as much in the background and in the kind of across HR and finance, and it kind of hadn't evolved as much. And so, I think from an employee experience perspective, quite a few people were shocked and hopefully less so these days, but we definitely assumed it would be a lot slicker perhaps in the background from an employee experience perspective. I was brought in actually to transform the HR team in Europe and the offer into the business, and was still predominantly paper-based. There was a payroll system and that was pretty much it. So I think even just from simply that angle, I think for an employee joining, to get a kind of envelope through the door of a pile of paper you have to complete, get your pension, and it's that, I think, from the onboarding, the start and from onboarding, and probably even from hiring, if I'm honest, it was not where it needed to be ultimately, which has been a super exciting journey. Obviously, gave me lots to get my teeth into, and it's been lots of fun. But I think if I chat to people, the more I chat to people, certainly within the tech industry, it's quite a common denominator. I think they kind of say, maybe it's not as slick on the inside as it looks on the out. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, ultimately, PlayStation's a super successful product, isn't it? And I think in business, and they focus in the right areas.
How do you take the brand and then evolve that people experience?
Yeah.
So that there's a cohesion between the brand promise, which is fundamentally customer looking, and the brand experience from an employee perspective.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think what I will say about the business, still to this day, I think fun is usually the first word that kind of drops out of people's mouths in terms of describing the culture and the environment. It's quite family oriented, quite a family focused culture in terms of you feel like you're in a family. There wasn't any internal comms, or certainly not much when I joined, so I managed to kind of bolster that, making sure that the platforms that you're implementing and the tools that the managers and employees are using and policies and all of that good stuff that's the bedrock of an employee experience is aligned to that. And talks in a certain way, even just onboarding email, silly things, but just having that real kind of flavour all the way through, I think, is what makes the difference. But I have to say, on a brand like PlayStation, that's mega easy, because if you're that way inclined, it's easy work, right? Because it's really great fun and it's a nice environment, fun products. So it gives you loads to go at from that perspective.
When you look back, what are some of the drops that you are particularly proud of as you shifted that employee offer through the years?
The sheer change, ultimately. I mean, we subsequently, so I spent probably the first 4 years of the 8 transforming Europe. And COVID then hit and we decided to globalise. So we had this kind of pivotal bonkers moment of like, everyone's remote, yet we're going to try and globalise, and this is all a bit mad. So I think there was this real kind of crunch in the middle, and then the last 3 or 4 years latterly have been around taking really what we did in Europe and then evolving it further. It actually fit really nicely. We got out, if the globalisation, certainly for HR, had happened any earlier, we would have really struggled because of just capacity of the team, capabilities of the skills within the team, etc. So, and the technology and everything else, just the way that the team were functioning and the business was functioning, it just really enabled us to flip towards the globalisation. An interesting point in that for me, and one which I've reflected on, it's interesting because at my time in kind of earlier in my career at SSL or Reckitt, as it's known now, we looked at making an acquisition. Third large brand, so we had Durex and Sean, we looked to make a third acquisition. And we looked a lot at kind of the culture of the organisation we were going to acquire and the type of brand and would it fit or would it not fit, etc., etc. And I think it's really interesting, even going through a globalisation then of a business, you're in a kind of similar, it's different employees, you're working together. From a people perspective, it's kind of a similar beast in that you are starting to put teams together and merge teams, etc. It makes total sense. My advice to anyone now would be get in early with your people team, with your HR team.
I think it's so wise, because anytime you're looking at potential merger and acquisition work, to understand the culture of the business, to understand the way that business thinks and the way it acts today, and how compatible that is between your business and this potential entry. There's so many little nit points there is to work through.
Early on in my career, and I was part of like an M&A team, and we did a lot of kind of culture audits. And at the time, I remember I was a bit young. You met me about then, Tim, and I was a bit probably cocky. And I remember thinking, I do all this stuff, and I'm not sure if it's really necessary, and we can just push them together, it'll all be all right. And, interestingly, my advice now is like, you can't do enough of that, actually, just assessing, I always used to, for years now, for certainly the last 3 or 4 years, I have kind of daily conversations about the fact, yes, UK and US speak English. Like, we are dramatically different culturally. And I always used to laugh with my US colleagues around, is it an English good? Is it a good? Is it a very good or is it a bad good? Like, can you help me? Because, we're like, yeah, it's good. But, even just to that level of like how things are said, how things are described, like just that day-to-day, what we think is acceptable to say in a meeting versus what, some other cultures may feel is acceptable. I think it's critical and it's really impactful, actually. And I think you can't do enough of that. I guess if you join an org that's global already and already is established, and remember, orgs can globalise in many different ways. In PlayStation, we truly kind of functionally globalised. I guess if you regionally globalise, you might not have as much, employees more junior might not have as much day-to-day interaction outside of the region. So that might be a little bit different. But from a PlayStation perspective, we globalised divisionally. And so, the really junior staff were having late night calls, we're in teams with colleagues in Japan and colleagues in the US. And so it has a real impact.
And prior to this has been quite a standalone culture. This has been a European entity that was fundamentally operating and reporting in itself.
Yes.
And then there was a shift in terms of reporting into the US.
So the US, in around 2016, they moved the headquarters from Japan to the US to ultimately to Silicon Valley, which makes product sense for sure. And that became the headquarters ultimately of the business. There was some work to do in the US anyway, because there was a few different entities. The hardware business was different, the software business, etc. So there was some amalgamation work to do in the US. So it was still quite quiet, I would have said, for a year or two. And then around 2019, we globalised the business truly, headquartered out of the US. So we've gone from kind of a Japanese headquartered org, working completely isolated. I mean, at the top, at the CEO level, there was a degree of interaction, of course, and with Sony. But ultimately, at the regional level, it was entirely regional. And I always used to laugh. I remember when I first joined thinking, news was all right because, again, predominantly UK-based. But I remember joining PlayStation thinking something different. And then at 5, you wouldn't get any more emails. Like, that was your day done.
Yes.
Because the Europe were all offline. And to be fair, Europe in PlayStation terms and Sony terms overall is a bit broad, to be fair. So I randomly had like Australia, New Zealand, and back in the day and Middle East, and it was slightly broader than how we'd geographically define Europe. But predominantly it went quiet. And that is catastrophically different to a global org headquartered in the US when 3 o'clock it gets loud, it gets noisy and loud. And, again, coming back to my earlier point around helping people, employees ultimately, but also managers and leaders understand the impact, like what is it actually going to look and feel like. You could join a global org tomorrow and know it's headquartered out of Asia or the US, or you can join an org that is European and has always been European for kind of 25 years, 30 years, and then overnight it changes. And that's hard for people. I think that was the bit we found, you know, I remember having a lot of conversations around, why do I need to reprove myself? You know, why do I need to, well, I haven't changed at all. Why do I need to demonstrate my capability to someone else? Or why? Because people had new line managers in different locations, etc. The other example I have of that actually, interestingly, was back in Durex days. And when Reckitt did acquire us, I know there was quite a few people that in kind of some of the change management piece, we heard that some of the Reckitt employees were struggling with the brand. I mean, you'd go work for Durex, wouldn't you? But if you don't want to, you wouldn't, type thing. And then all of a sudden when that comes in and you've got to market it or sell it or even do finance on it, whatever it is, people's level of comfort with that brand gave me tons of great stories to tell people. And that's not in their control. So all of a sudden overnight, you've been happy for 20 years and then life changes at work. A big chunk of advice is that clarity and really thinking that through, because you end up then just doing a lot of legwork at the end.
Reckitt has such a fantastic stable of household brands.
Yeah.
But to bring a condom brand into that without thinking through how that shifts the relationship between the employees and their business and the employer. How do I turn up now? Do I need to be the same? How do I need to be different? How do I describe this change?
SSL reminds me a lot of places. It's like a real fun place to be. Like everyone's it's a bit like a family, and I think Reckitt was a much more of a professional unit. I was never fully immersed in it, obviously, because that was at the point when I opted to head off travelling. Massive shift in culture, in business culture. Whole of the podcast on just acquiring businesses, how to do it, things you think are going to be amazing, and then it happens to you. We'd planned to acquire, and then we were acquired. And I remember thinking, and there was a bit of a giggle at the time around, brands that dropped on people's desks on day one and whether Vanish and Finish were the best stuff. Just jokes around things. But you look at stuff like that and you think, sure, they'll love to get a goodie bag of, don't you? When you're on the other side of it, you think some of that stuff's really cool. And I question whether it's, on day one, is it that cool? I'm not so sure. So it was great experience for me, certainly, to plan for an acquisition and then be acquired and kind of feel both sides of that piece.
I remember going through something similar when I was based in Australia, and we went through an integration with Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
The biggest brand.
Yeah.
And again, how do you demonstrate that respect both ways, that appreciation, that the reason you're going through this integration for those coming into the Coke stable of brands is because you guys are outstanding.
Yeah.
You have built a fantastic business. If you are the acquirer, you can't say that enough times.
Yeah.
It just shows for anyone thinking about mergers and acquisitions, listen, because I think so often we go through that kind of change and we're in broadcast mode.
Yeah.
Because I am here to give you this announcement, and actually it's meeting people where they are.
Yes.
Understanding their questions, their concerns, their considerations, and giving them space and time.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's hard, isn't it? Because it's a sensitive time. And so, you'll have worked with many leaders, as I have, that their gut response is like, just get in there and do the deed, and you're done and you can relax and disappear, basically. And it's so damaging. The whole kind of M&A activity, I think, it really depends what it is. And I come back to culture, the culture of the two businesses, whether it's acceptable to act like that, in the business you're going into, is that the way things have been done? And it's hard because you're never going to know all that, really. I mean, obviously there's been some degree of interaction before the deal's done and it's communicated, but it's really hard to get a handle on that from either side, really. But there are some fundamental, just empathy, bit of respect. There's some fundamental basics that you really need to show up with, actually. But I would say that's the same in global orgs per se. We had a joint venture condom manufacturing site in China. We wanted to relocate. We came out with a joint venture and we wanted to relocate our factory out of town industrial site. They were generating this kind of new industrial site and incentivising businesses to move. So we were moving out. And it was really impactful for the business. Business had been there for years, and it was people were going to have to move or at least stay in the week. A UK headquartered org moved, put an expat in at the top, and we're like, send a Brit across, I'll sort it. And we got halfway through the project, we're like, something's not right, this isn't working. And it's culture, right? It's always culture. It's kind of great, more senior in age and seniority. No one will say anything in the room. Like no one will say, no, that's not going to work, or you can't do that, and it was going off piste, right? And I remember going across there, went across kind of a week, a month, for a good 18 months, 2 years, spent a lot of time with the HR director over there, and he'd simply say, I can't say that in the room, can't do that. I ended up being the kind of conduit really between what do you really think and how can we best get that across in the meeting room or in the meeting or the kind of update or whatever. And I think you can't underestimate that impact of just, I think for me it's like being culturally aware and like getting really under the skin of how people are culturally in different locations. And then I think actually out of all of that, the most important bit is like being respectful. Kind of gets lost there. I think some people tick the, I've learned that in Japan you do this, this and this, and you never do this, this and this. And it ends there, and then they go in a meeting and behave the same. I'm like, you can't do that. And I've seen so many examples, whether it be working in India or China or Japan or in global orgs that have, you know, all different nationalities in the room. That's where it falls, basically.
I think that's so insightful. And I think for any leader listening to you, she or he has to think about how they are receiving information. And it just reminds me of that cliche that the king thinks the world smells of new paint.
Yeah.
You know, that sense of things are always being prepared for the leader. And in any organisation, there is a smaller version of that.
There is.
Because you do have the power. You have the power of influence. You have the power of promotion. You have the power of pay.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, to what extent am I sure I'm getting real, unfiltered information, perspective, challenge, context every time? I want to come on to a different part of your experience, because I know how passionate you are about talent, about how we identify, develop and progress talent. And I know that you had the global responsibility for that across PlayStation.
Yeah.
I'm really interested as to what your brief was and how you focused on that opportunity.
Yeah. Massively passionate about talent, I think, and across all my roles I've had varying different degrees. PlayStation gave me an opportunity to kind of specialise a little bit more whilst doing the Europe HR role, also kind of focusing on that special.
Here's a job, have another job.
Yeah, of course. Bearing in mind where we were in our globalisation, so it wasn't global in the slightest, and I took it from being kind of 3 regional teams with not really any global programmes actually at all, and developed a global team, both across talent and L&D ultimately, and started to establish programmes of kind of development programmes around leadership development, self-development, whether people were managing teams, managing organisations, managing themselves, various different levels of development, so that we were offering effective and consistent development opportunities across the org. That's quite complex in an org that has Japan and the US and Europe, let me tell you, not least for language, but also just culture, again. So that's no small job. And then we'd done little really on the talent identification front across PlayStation, certainly as a global org, obviously, because we'd fairly recently globalised. So starting to really just establish some philosophy. Why do we want to know do we care predominantly? Yes, we do. Why do we want to know? Do we want to know who the talent, or what does talent look like? PlayStation, interestingly, has this kind of, which makes it very, very interesting to do this sort of work, a very creative arm, as well as more of a corporate ladder. And so I think there's how do we identify talent across both? As we think about the hierarchy of the organisation, at some point it gets to a point, you need both. Do you need both? Or do you not? And can you have one bias but still do the other well, or not? And so there was a lot of conversation around really establishing what that talent looks like and what we hold out to be good talent in the company.
Was that working out whether one was ahead of the other or was needed to be ahead of the other going on to deliver the future strategic plan? Or was it a case of finding
the balance, I think. Yeah, I think it's finding the balance. And again, this would be different by organisation, obviously, but I think it's about finding the balance ultimately. And I think in my limited experience of just there you are and news, you are like creative, or you're kind of not creative. And I think it's hard to overlap those two, I think. So that was the key thing for us about whether we were succession planning for the CEO or looking at the next level down. And interestingly, where you end up is you have to start at like way down here. So whilst we might, initially we were like, let's get visibility of the talent group at the top, and the more senior role, senior director above, VP above, whatever that might be. I think it's then around, it's good to just talk. Leaders can't help but be very biased about their own people and protective of their own people, and everyone's fabulous in their own eyes. And I think simply by having a regular dialogue helps get through some of that. People feeling comfortable to be challenged about the other people in their team, etc., is all healthy debate. So I think the regularity of those conversations are critical and super important. You know, people they've gone up the hierarchy in their channel. And that's common. In most orgs I've been in, you have people that just go up the ranks and you know, maybe less frequently do the jumping across. And it really helped us understand, you know, if we want to tackle some of that, we're a few years out, but we have to start maybe here. And it might be worth taking a chance on Joe Blogs and moving them maybe from a studio or somewhere and putting them across in a different team.
A very linear development.
Yes.
So you weren't seeing the broad-based business skills, and you also weren't seeing the cross-geography experience that you were going to require in the future from the general management team.
And the benefit about it becoming a global org is that opportunity. It's the one thing we never did. We could have done a much better job of like selling it in. You know, it gives you tons more opportunity for people that are eager to go to different locations and get great experiences working and living in different countries. It was in COVID, right? So like no one was travelling, no one was leaving their living rooms, like no one was doing anything. So it wasn't like that was front of mind anyway. But I think there's a plethora of opportunity there, isn't there, for a business that's got predominantly a ton of young people, right? It's quite a young organisation. I think bags of opportunity there to get great skills and experiences in different locations and spend some time in the studio and then go and spend some time in a commercial unit and really get a feel for. And that's how there's some real kind of key people when you look at them and we'd be like, yeah, you know, that person's really good. And then you'd be like, why? And they'd be like, because they've done it. They've said, I'd like to move over here and I'd like to move over. Then you look at them and they're very rounded, but they've driven it, you know, and it was like, how can we start to really enable that and encourage it? And it is hard. Everyone loves their best person and they're brilliant and they make your job really easy as a leader. Do you want them to go and live in Timbuktu and never help you again? Not really.
How intentional are you going to be? Are you going to accept that actually we value autonomy incredibly highly and therefore we respect that people will make this go and happen for themselves?
Yeah.
And the danger with that is that does that give you a diverse group of potential leaders coming through, or do you see that cohort of all sharing particular characteristics?
Yeah.
And therefore you're not going to get the diversity of thought in your future leadership team.
Yeah.
So you can accept that, but accept that will have consequences, or you can say no, as a business, we are actually going to enable this for a broader group of people. That in itself is a choice.
It is.
I think so many businesses haven't quite thought about the way they need to show up exactly.
Yeah, and I've seen that in most orgs I've worked in ultimately. I think it's a struggle. And it's an interesting one, isn't it, about talent as well versus performance. Like, companies seem to feel comfortable, leaders seem to feel comfortable, like, tagging performance. But there's this, like, hush about talent, as if, like, that's another thing you just don't mention that. If you're on a list of talent, like, do we tell people, do we not? And in every company I've been in, there's this, like, random discussion around, are we clear about that? Are we not clear about that? Do we tell people, do we not? Can I tell my person that we think they're talented? And
sorry, that word, does that mean potential for future progress and future roles?
Yeah.
Or does that mean performance in role today?
That's business by, but what does it mean? You know, what does talent mean to you? I think in most orgs I've been in, it's been a mix of performance and potential. How do you define potential? If you do that around a table with leaders, you'll find they all have a slightly different view about what that looks like. It's actually really hard to pinpoint exactly what that is. Should it overlap with your performance scheme? Should it not? Should your performance scheme be something different? It's a whole different podcast on performance. That's a beast. But there's kind of so much to go at. And again, it comes simply down to just being really clear up front. And in those initial philosophical conversations around how transparent are we going to be? What does it look like? What is it? What are we going to do with it? Do we actually care? Should we just say we're not going to bother with it? Like, all those really upfront conversations, and they are interesting ones because sometimes they don't happen as kind of clearly as they should and as transparently as they should, and it ultimately is the HR professionals then makes it hard, I think, to map through that. And you'll know, because you'll have had it as well, a million people saying, I don't get, there's no opportunities, I don't get. That's what you hear, isn't it, on the ground? Then it makes it difficult.
And sometimes to lean into that conversation is to interrogate the business strategy. Because if you believe in a future back talent development, i.e., this is where we're going to land.
Yeah.
And for us to land there successfully, we will require these talent resources within our business. Sometimes when you then look at what the future state will require, you identify some hotspots. You haven't got people there at the moment.
Exactly.
These are completely different skill sets.
Yes.
So either you're going to buy them in, which is expensive, and
everyone else is buying them in.
Everyone else is buying them in, and it's not guaranteed that they're going to land.
Yeah.
You're going to have to borrow it from a partner organisation in some way. You're going to have to build it so you can put the development in place at this stage in order to build that capability. Or are there any opportunities for us to bot it?
Yes.
In terms of what is the role of technology within this?
Yeah.
And to look at each of those talent opportunities and to go, right, what is our solution to this?
Yes.
It's really interesting having those conversations with a broad leadership team, because they're then thinking about things in a different way.
Yeah, but it's amazing how many times you'll have that conversation, about lots of things in this space. It's amazing and that's why I, kind of reiterate around that whole clarity bit. It's really hard to get it sometimes. I don't think leaders know sometimes, and even there's been opportunities where we've, across organisations have been in when we've looked and bought it in. Bought it in is one thing, settling it in is something different. Like if that skill base or that skill set or that individual, whatever it may be, that talent is future facing and different to everything else that's been before, it's hard to settle that in the organisation.
Oh, the chances of the body rejecting the organ.
100%. There's not just buying it in, there's like the embedding it, retaining it, like settling it in, helping everyone adjust. Because like we've talked about with acquisitions and everything else, straight away there's what does that mean for me? Is there does that mean this is going to diminish? It has ongoing implications, doesn't it? It's not just to buy it in, it's an easy solution. It needs work and effort to get it there for sure.
Taking an organisation through change with and thinking about all the global touch points of it as you shift from isolation to global connection, and then to evolve that by then thinking through what the global talent requirements are going to be. And again, thinking from the future back into the organisation and to build those capabilities. Listening to the podcast, there are lots of business leaders, people leaders, thinking about how they can evolve their organisation, how they can be future ready. What final thoughts would you like to leave them with?
We've talked a lot about culture today, whether that's kind of organisational culture in a case of acquisitions, or whether that's geographical culture in a global organisation and the implications that has on how you do business. I think it would be not to underestimate that. It's very easy to not consider that actually as much, or tick a box of we've done some cultural awareness kind of development or whatever and it's all fine, or we've told people a few things. And I think really drilling down on what that means for how people do business, how things are around there, what will make a difference to people in different locations or different offices within your organisation or factories, whatever it might be, not underselling the impact that can have on whether it's your impact as a leader or the impact of the organisation, the impact of an acquisition, whatever the transaction is ultimately. I think just don't undersell that culture piece. Get a really good handle on what it is, and it takes quite a fine art, I think, to get it right. But I think really putting a lot of emphasis in there would be great.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Please follow Powered by People, podcasts from Three Hills on people-powered business transformation on LinkedIn or wherever you access your podcasts. Join us next time for more inspirational insight from people leaders who craft people-first approaches that enhance revenue, profitability, and long-term value creation. I will see you next time for more Powered by People.